back in May 2020, George Floyd, of course, murdered in Minneapolis, the United States of America, a black man killed at the hands of a white American police officer. Well, you'll remember it well. Protests rapidly erupted across the globe, bringing the Black Lives Matter movement to the fore. Over in Bristol, protesters targeted the statue of Edward Colston, a slave trader who forcibly carried over 84,000 people across the Atlantic. Now, the statue was both toppled and thrown into the harbour. Since its recovery, it was put in a museum and then was in storage for the last 12 months whilst a decision was made as to what to do with the statue. Now, British City Council will vote today on whether it should remain on the plinth, be displayed in a museum or discarded altogether. We can go live to Bristol. There for us is TalkTV's correspondent Nick Ellerby. Nick, a very good morning. Just tell us...
Oh, bless him, he's soaking wet.
It's really wet. The debate around this statue, today there'll be a vote. What do local people want to happen?
Yeah, morning, Rosie. Morning, Jeremy. Good morning to you. It's not such a good morning here in Bristol. It's pretty wet. But in terms of what the local people think about Edward Colston, it's quite complicated, really. It's about Britain dealing with its complicated past and you know, our part in the slave trade. I'm outside the plinth. I'm just next to the plinth here where Edward Colston was erected in 1895, that statue. And then, as you mentioned, during those Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, he was pulled down with ropes and dragged some 300 metres down this road here, past those buses, and into the harbour, which is, as I say, 300 metres. It's not a short distance. And he was then displayed in a local museum with some of the placards from that protest and information for the public. That vote today is about whether they can legally, a bit of admin really, whether they can legally separate Edward Colston from this plinth and maybe keep him in the museum forever. But I've been speaking to the people of Bristol, and here's what they think should happen to the statue of Mr. Edward Colston.
I personally think it should have been left in the harbour because it was fitting, because obviously that was where the slaves that he would have traded came from, and it was also just like cyclical, and I don't think it deserves to be put in a place that's like on display where art is and like a place of like something to admire.
I think him being in a museum is a context where people can talk about, okay, he was pulled down, he's been put up here, we can talk about why that was.
As it's come down, which I think was the right thing to happen, it is a teachable moment, isn't it? So if we put it in the museum, then people can see it and we can teach the sordid history of slavery.
I don't know why we have statues of people who were slave owners. That doesn't really make any sense to me. To me, that looks like you are glorifying, for lack of better wording, a slave owner.
Well, you know, as you can see, overwhelmingly, really, the people of Bristol are telling us that the best place for Mr. Edward Colston is in the museum. And actually 80% of respondents in that museum, when he was on display, said that that's the right thing to do. We're going to have a quick look at the debate. We're going to bring in councillor Christine Townsend, Southville Ward in Bristol. She's a member of the Green Party as well. Why can't we just put Mr. Edward Colston back on the plinth with a bit more information about his slave trading past?
Well, that was something that was called for over many decades, and it was blocked by various institutions and the politicians and the civic kind of leaders, if you like, in the city, and that isn't what people said they want.
So what do they want? What should happen to the statue of Mr. Colston now? What do you think?
Well, it looks like it's going to go in a museum. We would like to have seen a separate sort of space for the entirety of Bristol's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, rather than an addition to what is one of our central museums. And we'd also like to see a memorial to those that lost their lives as a result of what that man did in Bristol. OK, Christine Townsend of the Green Party, thank you very much. May come back to you in a sec. Going to bring in the other side of the debate. This is John Langely, former independent mayoral candidate for Bristol. John, why did you start a petition in 2021 to get Mr. Edward Colston back on this plinth?
Well, it was mainly to do with the fact that, you know, some self-entitled individuals felt it was their right to actually pull down public property and put it in the river. So that's what started me off. You know, let's face it, it's been here since 1895. So over the years, millions of people have been passing it every day, people going to work, you know, and people with more things on their, better things on their mind, such as paying the rent, paying the mortgage, paying their bills. And people just passed it, and it was almost invisible, you know, until they highlighted it.
OK, you say self-entitled individuals. Now, your petition got 60 signatures to put him back up. Actually, 11,000 people signed a petition to get rid of this statue before those Black Lives Matter protests. Would you say in Bristol yours is a minority opinion?
I think just a lot of people couldn't be bothered with it. It wasn't worth wasting their time. It was such a ridiculous idea. Why actually bother?
OK, John, thank you so much. So you've heard both sides there. That vote today at Bristol City Council, as I say, just a bit of admin to legally separate that statue of Mr Edward Colston from the plinth. It does look like that will pass. I've spoken to a few people on the council as well. And the most likely situation is that that statue is going to end up in M Shed, which is a museum just on the harbour. And there's an exhibition next month about protests, and that's where it's going to start, I think, guys.
Top job, Nick. When we first went to you, I thought you dived into the harbour to get the thing out, for God's sake, man. Well done. Good job. Thank you.
Absolutely fascinating. Nick, thank you so much. Nick Ellerby live there in Bristol as that debate continues about what happens with, well, statues like that, monuments. It'll be interesting to see how the day develops.